Hello, I think we're here.
We should
think we're on. Hi, welcome everyone. This is really exciting. We are on episode 30 of the Port Haven Streamcast, and we are here with our friend Cavan Scott. Say hello.
Hi, how you doing? This is weird, but if anyone's watching, I apologise. It's late-ish. It's not that late, but I had a very long day yesterday. I'm a bit sleepy. I'm drinking coffee. It could all go hideously wrong.
That sounds like any of our streams ever, to be fair, so you'll fit right in.
Good news.
Yeah.
But if you are familiar with this channel, you have probably seen us review something that Cavan has written. I have several of those things linked in the description below. And but yeah, Cavan has written the Star Wars Adventures in Wild Space with his partner Tom Huddleston. I always have to say it right because he has several celebrity counterparts with similar names. He's currently working on the soon to come out, well, I think you said, but anyway, there's going to be a third in the series, but the Choose Your Destiny Star Wars books, which are a lot of fun. They're like choose your own adventure books. Just recently in October, we had the big Star Wars Adventure Comics miniseries for Vader's Castle. Whoa, sorry. I'm so professional. That's an alarm on my phone. Anyway, it's fine. But yeah, so many things that are exciting. And then the Star Wars Adventures comics in general, I know that you've written a few here and there on that. And we're just really excited to talk to you today. This is fun. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. And I've been told to man up because it's only 8 p.m. So I'm going to man right up here.
That's Foxy Tom there for you.
Well, thanks, Foxy Tom. No, so the reason why yesterday was a great day, but a really long day. So I live in Bristol in the West Country. In London, the Royal Albert Hall, they had the Star Wars New Hope in concert when you have the London Symphony Orchestra playing, live with the movie playing. And so in the morning, Tom Huddleston and me did some kids events at the hall, and then they very kindly said, and we could go back and watch it, which was lovely. So I watched Star Wars with the live orchestra playing, not just any live orchestra, the same orchestra that obviously recorded the soundtrack. Not the same people. I don't think that's. I don't think 40 years on they're going to be able to.
Really impressive.
I know, but the thing is, it was impressive because they don't get much pause in that film at all. They put an intermission in. So just as the Falcon gets drawn into the Death Star, because that's obviously the exact halfway through the film.
Right.
Gotcha.
They gave you a chance to go and buy some ice cream, and then they could obviously sit and rock in a corner somewhere. And then they came out, and then in the second half, it's pretty much full on, all the way through. So they did, that was amazing. But yeah, then it was a long drive home and late night. So Foxy, that's why I'm a bit leery today.
And just think, you could have, in an alternate universe, been watching a live disco band play Star Wars music.
Yeah.
That would have been amazing as well. I'd actually like to travel to that alternate universe. The Mecca theme version. That'd be why not?
See, I want an alternate universe.
Perhaps someone should do that, because that means there is obviously that print of the movie now that has no soundtrack.
Right.
So they could do the disco version. I'd pay good money to see that.
I would pay good money for that too.
The campaign starts here, Lucasfilm. Let's do this.
I want a version that's just Oscar Isaac playing acoustic guitar. That's what I want.
Let's give us all the versions. Come on. Light jazz. That'd be good.
Yep.
Freeform jazz. Let's go all the jazz.
If we still had Christopher Lee, he could have given us a metal version.
Could have. Get William Shatner to sing it. There's so many different versions we could do.
But speaking of Christopher Lee, so one of the big projects you just finished up was, or just finished releasing, I suppose, is Vader's Castle.
Yep.
one of the issues involved Count Dooku. So for those of you who don't know, it released one issue a week throughout October, and it was a scary comic about a group of explorers that find their way on Darth Vader's castle, which we saw in Rogue One. And while they're adventuring on Mustafar, they are trying to keep each other sane by telling each other ghost stories, as all people do. And there's some great ones. The logical thing. I liked that the comic knew that it was a little bit illogical, because the one, forgive me, I can't remember all of the names, but the little
Script.
Yes.
Script is he was me going, well, why are you doing this? So, yeah. Because you're in a really scary situation, so let's tell each other increasingly scary stories.
Right.
And let's face it, Script is the most anxious character I think I've written in a Star Wars thing. They're basically torturing the poor little woodlouse. I mean, it's nasty. That's workplace bullying right there. So yeah, but it's all you have to take everything like that with a little pinch of salt.
Right.
But yeah, Dooku was the starting point, and that's where it all came from.
Yeah. And that it really felt like the kind of classic horror film, which of course Christopher Lee had a connection to as well.
Yeah.
With those stories, to the extent that you can talk about it, were you able to kind of pick what the other side stories were, or was that something where they were kind of like, we want you to tie it into Rebels, we want you to tie it into this?
No, it was a pretty loose brief. I mean, what happened was, so Mike Seglain at Lucasfilm and I both have a love stroke obsession with things like Hammer horror, Amicus horror. I think if you're a bit nerdy about sort of classic 1960s and 70s horror, Amicus was sort of the other major horror movie house over here in the UK. So whereas Hammer did sort of like not the kind of things like Frankenstein, Dracula, the classics, remaking a lot of the kind of stuff that Universal did. Amicus would do portmanteau movies. So you would have Peter Cushing appearing in as a tarot reader on a train, and loads of other people would sit on the carriage with him, and he'd show his tarot cards, and every one of those tarot cards would show them a future that they're going to experience when they go off the train, or something like that. And sometimes it's literally just people just telling stories. Right. And Mike and I obsess about these things regularly. And so Mike's ambition for a long time had been to do a Dooku story to play up the Halloween aspect of Christopher Lee and Dracula. So we talked about it a lot, and it came from there really, and it sort of span off into what became Vader's Castle. And yeah, we basically listed the kind of stories we wanted to do. So we wanted to do a ghost story, we wanted to do a monster story, we wanted to do a witch story, we wanted to do a vampire story, and when it was the case of some of those roles. As soon as we said we wanted to do a ghost story, there was only one ship we could do a ghost story on. There was only one character we could have as vampires. And then for the monster one, it was originally going to be the Wampa, I think. But then Forces of Destiny were doing the Leia episode when they go into the Wampa's cage. So it seemed like we were doing the same thing again. So from that moment on, I started fighting for Ewoks. And I didn't have to fight too hard, but I think there were a few moments when people going, are you sure you want to do this? And you sure you want to reference so much Ewok lore? And I went, yes, of course. And then I put the script in, and they went, oh, this is a deep dive, isn't it? I was like, yes. So I knew I wanted the Ewoks in there from the off. I mean, they were right from the off, really. But we did change the time frame a bit at one point, because I think in the early days it was much later in the timeline. So when we pushed it to be in around Rogue One sort of era, then we had to change some of the characters. And so for the Ewok one, originally it was going to be Wicket, but we obviously couldn't have Wicket. So that's when it became, I thought it would be fun to have Chirpa as the young character. So it was pretty. It was between the two of us. We were pretty much cherry picking what we wanted to do, and there was a few that we couldn't do because as always in Star Wars, something else is happening somewhere else that you
Right.
you clash up against. So you always come up with more ideas than you need, because you know that either something can't happen yet, or it's gonna interfere with something else that's going on in the galaxy. So, but largely we got what we wanted, which is nice. And of course, the great thing about making it Rogue One era is that Vader could be in it, because we had a really cool idea of how Vader was have a presence in it, but it was going to be much later in the timeline, so Vader wouldn't have been around physically. And so, as soon as we decided that, we knew that issue 5 would be Vader, and let's face it, I wasn't going to complain about that.
Right, obviously.
And looking back, you're doing a Vader's Castle series, you want Vader to turn up.
Right.
It's pretty obvious, really. So, it was pretty. We pretty much got everything we wanted, and who we wanted.
Yeah, I think the Ewok issue was my favorite one.
I really enjoyed that one myself.
So I'm glad
I'm not
you
supposed to have favorites, but it's probably my favorite.
Of course, I also remember the tweet that you sent out several months ago that was just a picture of all of your research material.
I know that you did a video on, which I've never had before. I have to be careful now.
We analyze everything.
No, that was quite an early on picture as well. So there's some stuff there that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell us that, because that's just.
And some of it wasn't for Vader's Castle either. I was being a little bit naughty. Some of it wasn't for Vader's Castle, but it's just I was working on a number of things, different things on the same day. So what happens is, so this is my study. That's pretty much turning into a Star Wars shelf, and so I take things off, and then I'm really lazy and I don't put them back up. So they just sort of like start. I build an island around me, start a fortress of books, and so. I looked down it and went, oh, look, that's what I've been working on today. And so I thought I'd take a picture of it. And then you analysed it to a crazy degree.
Yeah, well, that's
so I'm going to have to work harder now to put you off the... So, yeah, the Ewok thing, that was definitely that, because the Endor comic, which I love, that was one of the influences of wanted to do it. That's what I was showing to people, going, look, you can do Ewoks. Even though that's far more cartoon Ewoks than we were doing. One of my first notes always in all the pictures was Ewoks have black eyes.
Yes.
They don't have pupils. So that was, and I think that was a major thing for the tone. And then when we got Robert in to do the art, we just knew it was going to be incredible.
Right.
And it was. And that color, the color and everything, it was just, it felt like one of those, like a really old sort of 1970s 2-3 color book when they've got the money to do all the. So I love that. Yeah, no, I was really happy how many different styles we got in that book, actually.
Yeah.
And that was what you were saying there is one of my favorite parts of the series was the storyline at Vader's Castle, which stars, of course, Lena Graff from Adventures in Wild Space, which we kind of became the Adventures in Wild Space YouTube channel there for a while. So hopefully everybody.
Adventures in Wild Space. Well
so that was exciting, but the art style there was very was one way, and then each of the stories kind of had their own, and I thought that was really strong and did a lot for the tone, because like the Rebels one on the Ghost almost felt and as a super fan of this, I mean this in the best possible way, it felt very Scooby-Dooey. And then the vampire one really reflected kind of the Hammer horror look, and the Ewoks one looked perfect, and then the crazy like vine one had its own style. And I really appreciated that it just made each issue feel distinct within the series.
Yeah, and there was a practical aspect to it as well, because obviously we, as in all these things, comics take a lot of time, and doing a weekly is always a challenge, especially we didn't have a lot of time to do it, and Derek Charm, who did the main sort of arc, so Derek's the first person I worked with on Star Wars Adventures. He does a lot of the main sort of big events in the series. He would never have had time, because he's also doing Squirrel Girl for Marvel. He's a very busy man, and we knew we wanted him, and he'd come up with that slightly different style for the series as well, which is a lot darker than his usual stuff. So yeah, it was a really clever idea to use the, which wasn't my idea, which is why I can say it was clever, to come up with different artists, because that meant that we would have the chance that Derek could just, concentrate on doing that umbrella story, and then we could have, at the same time, we can have artists working on it, on the different stories. So they were all written before people got started work on it, so we could have people working concurrently. And so it's the reason it came out, because otherwise I think we would have killed Derek, which apparently I've been told by an official memo that we're not allowed to kill Derek Charm. Which is odd.
Noted.
Apparently we're not. So there we go. So yeah, it was a really, really clever idea, I think. It was either Mike or Denton at IDW who came up with that one, so I'll give them the due. I can't take credit. I will obviously take credit if people want me to. But no, it was their idea.
How is the process different writing for a comic as opposed to a novel, as opposed to an audio drama? Like, you've done a lot of different types of writing. How do you approach it differently?
It starts the same way. It starts, I brainstorm an outline the same way. Then what happens with a comic, because comics are a bit of a dark art in the way that when you write them and when you read them, there are certain conventions in it. So, when you have a reveal, you don't want it to be on the right-hand page, so when people open a spread, they see what the reveal is straight away. So basically, a comic is a series of cliffhangers. So what happens as soon as the outline's been approved, then I have I literally lock it out on index cards, so I know when the page turns are going to be, and how many panels are pretty much going to be on the page. And it does change a bit while I'm writing, but I pretty much know going into it. So I've got a comic I'm writing towards the end of this week, so that's already planned, ready for me to go. So when I sit down on Wednesday in the morning, I know what's on every page. So but that sort of works as well on the other forms as well. So obviously with something like the Choose Your Own Adventure books I'm doing for Star Wars at the minute, the amount of planning that goes into those is incredible. But even on a normal prose novel, you have a chapter breakdown. So it's just there's a slight difference. But I'm an outliner anyway, because of the kind of work I do. I have to be, because I work with a lot of people like Star Wars and Lucasfilm, so they need to know what I'm doing. Apparently. And so it's all planned out before. And yeah, in a similar way with audio, I break it down into scenes. But probably, the comic is the most technical, and it's also probably the media that I'm most comfortable with, and I can see most easily when I sit down and do it. So one of the things I like about how I work and working on so many different forms as well as so many different properties is that if I have a month when I'm writing a lot of prose, then I sit down to write a comic, and it's like a breath of fresh air. And so it keeps that variety going, it keeps that fresh, and there's always going to be something else that's slightly different coming up. So that's one of the reasons I love doing what I'm doing, because there is they all work different muscles, I suppose. When you're writing, it's all slightly different. So the central storytelling is the same. It's just the way you do it.
Well, that was something I was kind of wondering, because I've been reading both of the Choose Your Destiny, and I try to read it. I read it with multiple bookmarks, so I get to a decision point, and then I can read all the different ways it goes. When you're writing something like that, do you sit down and write kind of the correct way through, and then kind of fill out the different branches? Do you kind of come up with the branches? When you're kind of sitting down to tackle something like that, what is the process?
I have because I've never written one before when they asked me to write it. And originally those books weren't going to be Choose Your Own Adventure books. They were going to be straight chapter books. And it was decided quite late in the conversation that it'd be quite cool to turn them into that. So having never written one before, I had to have a slight panic, cup of tea, and then tear a book apart to see how it works. So I got a Choose Your Own Adventure book and literally tore it apart to see how the plans work and drew diagrams and stuff. And so after working that out, then I do it in like a mind map. So I plot the story in chunks And then largely I do the canon path first, but every now and then I make notes saying, oh, this could be somewhere that we go. And so it ends up being, when I was on the Star Wars show, Andy described it as like a murder investigation. You know, those things when you get pictures on the wall, and that's exactly what it's like. Other than there's no murder, because again, I'm not allowed to kill Derek Charm. And so,
just R2D2.
No spoilers. And that's the fun thing about doing those books, is that I can crash the Millennium Falcon, because turn a page and it's back to normal again. So, so they can make your brain ache a bit when you're planning them out, but they're also great fun because you can do that. Things are going, what kind of situation can I put them in? It's not exactly the same as coming up with a normal story, because there are things you will do in a choose your own adventure book that you wouldn't necessarily do when you're planning a normal story, because you have to put them in situations where they will make the wrong choice, and you have to write that path. So again, it's another different way of working, which I didn't think I was going to be doing, so that's quite nice.
Right. One thing I liked about both of the Choose Your Destiny books so far is the number of Easter eggs and references to other things in there. Are those, I know we talked a little bit about this before the stream, are those usually things that you choose to put in there, or are they all just drops that you're given to add in?
It's a bit of both, really. I mean, with the Han and Chewie one,
right,
there was a lot more for that one, where basically I put in placeholder planets and situations, and when it came nearer the time and they could talk to me about stuff from Solo, that we could then slip it in. But they gave me some guidelines of the kind of things that they would like to see, and then some of that just happened by pure happenstance.
Right.
I do have a habit of duplicating the films quite a lot when I'm planning. I did it in Adventures in Wild Space. I managed to write the beginning of Rogue One in the first one without knowing, and was told I had to change that. Again, not knowing why I had to change it. And a lot of the stuff that I came up originally for Solo one ended up being quite near Solo, so we had to change that. So so there are some elements, and I always ask, is there things we can put in that will tie into other stuff? But I also love an Easter egg because I'm a Star Wars fan, and so I'm always slipping them in. And there's some that I'm gonna have to be careful that I got to be careful I don't always put a reference into a giant green rabbit, but there's every danger that will happen. So I do try and slip in as many as possible as I can, as long as they don't derail the enjoyment and the story. I think it's fair game. But it's I have my certain obsessions that do end up being mentioned in things, and luckily the people I work with have those obsessions as well. So that's good.
I did catch a certain green rabbit in the Luke and Leia one.
Yeah, well, that's quite blatant, to be honest. They mention him by name, so that one. There's some coming up where they're not mentioned so much in name, but
right.
But yeah, that was also part of me just going, because that is on the canon path. So if you've got to that point, well done. That was me going, no, that story in Adventures was canon. A lot of people go, no, it's not canon. It's like, no, it is. Jackson lives and always will.
But yeah, I was really surprised. I was really surprised with the references too, because the first time I read through the Han and Chewie book was before I saw Solo, and then I reread it afterwards, and I was like, wow, there's just so many things in here that are connections that you just don't see.
Yeah, well, it's the fun part of it, and there's levels of how much as one of the writers before a film comes out, and but then quite often they'll slip things in at the last minute as well, and they'll tell you they're doing it. They can't always explain why, but you do get sort of a list of things. So there's a reference to a character from Resistance in the Luke and Leia book, and that was very much a. I'd included a bunch of pirates in it, and they said, "Oh look,
I don't know if you
why
guys can see it or not. If I have a frame ball.
why don't we make it one of the characters from Resistance?" So yeah, so I mean, again, that's when the teamwork thing happens. They're very good at seeing what you're doing and going, "Oh, if you just turn that slightly to the left, you can make it this."
Okay, I can try it again.
so-
I can see the stream, but I'm seeing it on a delay. So it's...
There we go. So yeah, that's the fun bits. But obviously, yeah, you don't want it to take over the story, and you don't want that to be the most important thing about it. But I do love slipping them in, and also slipping in things to stuff that I'm writing now that aren't necessarily out yet.
Right.
Mhm.
That's always good fun as well. Stuff that we're planning that you can then slip a reference in, and then it looks like you've been very clever later on in the day.
Right.
It's funny because I rewatched our interview that we did earlier in the year, and it was funny because there's all these things you couldn't talk about in that interview, and then when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, I think he's referencing that, and the Free Comic Book Day Adventures issue that you had. I think you kind of hinted at. We were probably just on the cusp of you even being able to talk about it at that point, but it was just kind of I don't think I could do it, just like sit and not tell people what I'm working on. So I don't know.
Oh, it is a nightmare. It's because also you want to talk about stuff because it's exciting, and especially when it's something like Star Wars, which you love, it's really tempting. But yeah, obviously you'd never work on it again. So yeah, so I think was it with the reference to I was putting something in about the holiday special in the Free Comic Book Day. Was that the thing I talked about? I can't remember.
You couldn't even say that it was Han and Chewie yet.
Oh yes, well there you go.
The cover was it? I think it was Forlong.
Oh yeah, it was Forlong. Yeah, it was. Yeah, we couldn't say it was young, and we couldn't say it was young Han as well. Yeah, so yeah. As I say, half the time I have no idea what I can. So I just don't talk about stuff because it's just easier because I haven't got a clue what's going on and what.
And another thing you said you were hoping to be able to write Leia one day, and now you have gotten that chance.
And I was blatantly writing her at the time.
Cavan.
Yes. I don't always do that, but So I mean, there's stuff that I'm not necessarily for Star Wars, but the stuff I'm working on at the minute that isn't for like till 2020. So it's difficult to that's why most of the time I just don't talk about these things. But then you can't help it every now and then being a bit naughty and going, I can tease a few things here. I think that I learned from the master with Stephen Moffat, the former showrunner on Doctor Who, and Russell T Davies as well, who basically the rule of thumb is that rule number one, the showrunner lies. And back when Doctor Who came back in the for the new series, Russell T Davies was going, oh no, we'll never have the Master in Doctor Who again in the next series that we drop. We'll never have the Cyberman again. 2 weeks later. So yeah, it's I think I've looked at them and that's how you can blame them.
Yeah.
I enjoy watching the Master Dave Filoni with being vague about things that are coming up soon.
Yeah, exactly. There's well, and they do it if you watch the panels from like things like San Diego. I think the one with Daniel on it when he couldn't talk about the solo book he was doing, but there was lots of heavy hints going on, and yeah, so we have fun with it as well.
Let's see here. So going back to a ways in terms of content you've made, but we were talking about how Lena from your Adventures in Wild Spaces made it through to Adventures in Darth Vader's castle and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How does it kind of feel to basically have created these characters that are Star Wars characters but yours, and to kind of see them pop up? I mean, even their descendant Emil has popped up in some comics I think that you didn't even write yourself. I
Yeah, well,
think,
that's
yeah.
crazy. So I wrote the first Emil story, and
Hmm.
then other people have been writing him yet. So if people don't know, in Star Wars Adventures at the back, you have a series called Tales from Wild Space,
Hmm.
which is a way of doing anthology stories, and sometimes stories that you're a little bit sort of like you don't know if it's the narrator who's being particularly reliable as well. So you get a chance to do stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do. It was too on the nose. And again, it was one of those when Adventures started, we didn't know who was going to be telling those stories at the back. It was at one point it was going to be C3PO and R2D2,
Hmm.
but that was too limiting. The same reason Maz was mentioned, that was too limiting. And so we created someone new. And again, delightfully, it was Lucasfilm that came back and went, well, let's make it a graph, because they've now found that that family is now the storytellers of the Star Wars universe, which is
Hmm.
fantastic. And you have the Graph Archive, who are collecting maps, and so it's amazing to see. I found out about the Galactic Atlas was going to be a Graph Archive thing on the stage at Star Wars Celebration when they were showing it, and that was the first time. And both me and Tom were sitting there, and we had no idea that the link for the family was going to be there. And yeah, so it's a dynasty now. We've got grandchildren to our original children that we were writing.
Right.
It's bizarre. Kratos is about his 11th body. So there is now, there are many monkey lizards. And as I say, it's become a bit of a mission of mine to get Lena into every part of Star Wars. But because again, originally she wasn't going to be the lead character in Adventures in Wild Space, and again, it came from Lucasfilm and not from me, which was lovely. And so, and we'd always talked about what happened to them after Adventures in Wild Space, because they're around at the very beginning of the Rebellion. So what point? And they'll be in their mid to late 20s at the time of the original trilogy. So what would they be doing? So there's been lots of conversations, and now we sort of know a part of what Lena's been doing, and we know that she carries on to other stuff. We don't know where Milo is yet. There's mention of Milo, but we don't know what he's up to.
You don't happen to know what he's up to, do you? Just kidding. It's fine.
But talking about that,
well, I've got some ideas. Some other people.
That's fair. But I loved talking about timeline stuff. Just the way that you were able to work in Ezra's parents into the Adventure in Wild Space. Like it's a small thing in terms of the timeline, but it makes it a bigger deal in part of like the canon of characters that we have.
Yeah. Well, we didn't want to. It was really nice to be able to create a little corner of the universe. And so how it came about is that over here we have this thing called World Book Day, which I think I've talked about before. That kids get a voucher and you can spend it on a number of 10 little books, or tiny little chapter books. And they wanted to do a Star Wars one. Force Awakens wasn't out yet, so they couldn't do anything based on Rey or Finn, or because they weren't characters that you could do to write about. Yeah. Again, they didn't really want to go back and do original trilogy stuff or prequel trilogy stuff, because it sort of would get in the way of doing the Force Awakens stuff later on in the year. And they had the books that the For the Awakening and Moving Target and that kind of thing, which were their job was to sort of reintroduce these characters.
Right.
So the idea came up to try something new and create a new corner. And so it was really nice as well to have it coming from the UK branch, just like the Star Wars publishing teams, and so that's where Adventures in Wild Space came from. But at the same point, even though we didn't want to completely bog it down, because the thing we always say is don't make Star Wars smaller.
Right.
It's very easy to have everyone knowing each other, and so it would have been. I don't think it would have been right for them to meet a very, 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 very young Han Solo, or or anything like that. But with Rebels and Ezra and where he is in his timeline, it just seemed a nice way of sort of touching it, but not bogging it down into continuity. So, and I don't think if you didn't know Rebels, it wouldn't mean anything to you. That baby in the crib is just a baby in a crib. But if you know, like all these things, if continuity works well, and you know who that character is, then it means something to you.
Right.
And it shouldn't, as I say, derail the story.
Right.
And then we blew all that by having Tarkin at the end. But yeah, and again, that was something that came out of conversations, and it was a conversation: do we create a new villain or do we have Tarkin? And for obvious reason, Tom was quite keen on having Tarkin. And yeah, I think that, and it did tie it all together at the end. There's a link to in that last book of why the Empire is mining certain parts of wild space, and it's obviously, we now know it's all to link into building the Death Star. So so it made a lot of sense. But yeah, it's a nice era of Star Wars to talk about, which is it's starting to get filled in now with the stuff with Solo and everything around it. We're starting to see that sort of young Empire time.
Right.
But it's a really interesting time to play with. Still going back to the thing that Milo wanted to join the Empire, not like Luke wanted to join the Empire to get him off the planet, but Milo just thought it was the best way of having a life, going out there and finding things, because the Empire are the good guys.
Right.
Which, and it makes total sense that somebody, especially at his age, would see it that way. And that's something I think the new canon has done really well, which is kind of shown how the average Imperial wouldn't see how bad the Empire really is until they kind of were forced to face it.
No, I mean, I think the thing I love most of Star Wars now is the idea that people think that the Emperor looks like a kindly old man. And that's just marvelous bit of characterization. And again, that bit at the end of Rebels is just superb, because that's exactly what he'd do as well. That he's not going to. So yeah, and I just love to think, I keep going back to the idea, all those stormtroopers on the Death Star must have got a real shock when he walked down the ramp. It's like, who is that guy? So everyone who sees him goes, oh, he's having a bad day, isn't he? So, but yeah, I love that.
Under the weather.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't sleep very well last night, did he, Foxy? Yeah.
I'll ask this question broadly because we don't want to get you in trouble, but I know we can't talk about the next Choose Your Destiny book other than it exists, and we know it's about Anakin and Obi-Wan. But with this, and then one of your Star Wars Adventure comics has Obi-Wan at Dex's diner. So you've kind of been able to write in multiple time periods within Star Wars. Do you have a favorite time period to write in, and how does it feel to kind of like sit down, get into like, okay, this is what the galaxy is doing now, and this is what the galaxy is doing now?
It's an odd one, because naturally the original trilogy is always going to be special to me. But Clone Wars is such a big part of my Star Wars fandom, and so I've really enjoyed going back into doing the Obi-Wan and Dooku's story for Darth Vader, and now doing the Choose Your Destiny. In fact, I've written a lot of Obi-Wan.
You really have.
I really have, a very short space of time. And so I do love that period of sort of between the two. I've not written a lot of current Star Wars yet, which is something I'd like to do more. But it's any Star Wars. Writing any Star Wars is good Star Wars. I mean, the original trilogy is kind of the bit that we all want to write, because it's what we grew up. A certain generation of us grew up with. But it's nice to, again, I've talked about it before, I think, on our last interview. Rebels was my daughter's, gateway into Star Wars. So writing Kanan and Hera was as well. So that was a very long answer. Basically, was no, I like it all. But I thought it would always going to be, oh yeah, I'll write the original trilogy. I'll write it. Thanks. But yeah, I'm enjoying writing prequel trilogy a lot more than I originally thought I would. And I will write Obi-Wan until someone stops me.
Well, that reminds me, we did talk about this a bit in the previous interview, but for those that are here, of course, in the Star Wars from a Certain Point of View book, which is crazy that it's been out over a year now, because that also means we've been doing stuff for the site for over a year now. But you wrote the story of Obi-Wan as he dies on the Death Star, which you also happen to be wearing on your shirt. I don't know if you've been watching chat, but they've been having a bit of a costume contest between the three of us.
Oh, really? Okay, who's winning?
I think you are currently.
Well, this is the T-shirt from the show yesterday. From the so you could only get this at the Albert Hall yesterday. So that's why. So I wasn't going to buy a new T-shirt yesterday, but then they said exclusive, and I, here's my wallet. So yes.
Well, there you go. Because of that, you're currently winning the fashion show.
There we go.
But that was I really liked the Obi-Wan story.
Yep.
And even though I knew exactly how it was going to go, I think my heart was racing more in that story than any of the other ones I read. What was your thought process in kind of figuring out because there's a lot of Force lore going on there basically, and how Obi-Wan is experiencing this kind of final moment. Was that something that just kind of happened? Was that something you'd imagined before? Was that something they kind of guided you on?
It wasn't. It came from the moment when they said, "What would you like to write?" Because I mean, that was the lovely thing with that project, is they did say, "Here's a list of the things that people have already chosen. Here are the list of the things that you can do." And Obi-Wan's death wasn't on the list, and so. I don't know if it's because he was too central a character, but I just thought I'm going to go for it anyway. It was one of those moments going, if I don't ask, I'm not going to know if I can.
Right.
But I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew that I wanted to write that point of view. Because it's always interesting writing a ghost after they've died, because, they have a different... and then Elizabeth came back and went, yeah, no, absolutely. And I was like, brilliant. Now what do I do? It's really scary. And from the necessity, that's where the idea came from. And I was also cheating. It meant I could write various ages of Obi-Wan.
True.
So, and I wanted to write young Luke. I wanted to write Luke as a boy. And so it was a complete cheat, and it sort of went from there. So the actual idea came out quite quickly after I'd completely dropped myself in it, and sat there and panicked for a bit. And they were brilliant. They just went with it, and they just let me have a play, really. So yeah, it was. And because the other thing is that I didn't realize at the time that Claudia was writing the Qui-Gon story.
Right.
She didn't write the Obi-Wan story. So again, that was complete coincidence that at the beginning that we were dovetailing quite nicely on the stories, and then we've talked about it since. And again, it's that thing of we're all writing these things, and you're all very much in a mindset anyway that these things naturally link up. So it was that wasn't as planned as much as it seems, I think, Right. So and that happened again more often than not, that we all get together and we chat and we realize we're working along similar lines, and then you can start sharing stuff. And so there's been a few cases since then of we've all been working on different things, and we chat and then we go, oh, if you do that, I can do this. And then similarly, you've got story groups saying, oh, such and such is doing that over there, so why don't we bring it into this? So a lot of it happens because we're all just thinking along very similar lines, I think.
Right. That was one thing I noticed when I was reading through the book too, is because Master and Apprentice, which is funny that it's titled that, because conveniently there's a novel called Master and Apprentice coming out soon. That story felt so peaceful compared to yours that was so intense. So it was kind of fun to see the two different ways of that. Yeah,
it's I don't know. I've always been fascinated ever since I first saw the films with the fact that Ben sacrifices himself. So it's a very different death to Qui-Gon, who doesn't expect to die. Ben knows he's going to die, and it still gets me. Sitting there yesterday watching it on the big screen again, when Ben looks at Luke, looks back at Darth, and there's a smile on his face, that always gets me, and I always fill up. And it never stops. I can watch that film so many times, and Ben's death always affects me because he knows exactly what he's doing, which is probably why I had such a strong reaction to Luke in The Last Jedi, because Luke learned from best. So I think that's one of the pivotal points for me in Star Wars is Ben's sacrifice so they can get away, because let's face it, it would all go hideously wrong at that point. If Ben had kept on fighting, the ship probably wouldn't have got off the Death Star. So and it's one of the most Jedi things we've seen in the entire saga, until The Last Jedi. So it's I had to try to get that moment, because I never expected them to say yes. I was looking at this game. Well, I'll choose that one, or I could write a story on that. But I thought it could be my only chance to write Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I'm going to go for it. And they said yes. Yay!
Fantastic.
Well, as we start to come to the end of our hour here, we started a thing on the other Streamcast interview that we did with Adam Christopher. We have a string of kind of short questions here that we want to ask all the people that we interview on this platform. I say short. Some of these are difficult, I guess, because the first one is, do you have a favorite Star Wars character? Like, can you pick?
Chewbacca. Well, Chewbacca is my favorite, and he's a really good one to say as well, because he is legitimately one of my favorites. So, but then it changes what I'm watching at the time, what I'm reading, what I'm working on. It's really hard. I struggle with that question so much. But Chewbacca is legitimately. I have more Chewbacca figures than any other figures. So I think that's a good way of telling. If a new Chewbacca action figure comes out, it will soon be in my collection.
The next question: what is the most recent book that you read?
The most recent book I read was a book called The Lingering, which is a ghost story about a couple with a secret who go to a commune to start their life, and there's ghosts it's in an old asylum. So that's obviously where you want to go when you're having problems in your life. I'll go and live in an old asylum. And I read that, and then I read that just before Halloween, and then between Halloween and the 1st of December I read short stories, largely ghost stories and things. So that's something I do every year. So I've been reading loads of ghost stories since, and shorts.
If you weren't an author, what do you imagine you would be instead?
I would be a Jedi, obviously. I think I would probably have been a teacher.
That's great.
I enjoy doing. One of the reasons I like doing kids' books and kids' comics, as well as other stuff as well, is that it means I get to do events for kids and go into schools and work with kids who don't necessarily like reading because they've not found the right thing to read yet. So I read books now because of things like Star Wars and Doctor Who, and I read the novelizations and the comics, especially the comics. So I do doing school visits, but then the good thing is, like people saying, aunties and uncles say, I love being an auntie and uncle because I can give the baby back. So I can go into school and I can be going for a day and be all excited and go Star Wars, yay! And then I don't have to do any of the bad stuff. So, but yeah, I think I would have probably.
That's great. What is your go-to karaoke song?
It would be the Bowie and Jagger version of Dancing on the Street.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
There you go.
That really is my go-to. It's not what would be. That is my
go-to. If you could retire to a Star Wars.
Do they have karaoke at Celebration?
I hope so.
Don't they?
And
Yeah.
if it is, I'm gonna belt out "Good night" and not "Goodbye." That's for
Well, there
sure.
you go. Well, I'll obviously be dancing in the street. So there we are. Something to look forward to, folks. Or not.
If you could retire to a Star Wars planet, what planet would you want to retire to?
Well, that's quite a good. Oh. Well, Naboo would be quite nice, wouldn't it? Because I mean, they have the odd battle, but it looks nice and they have good ducks. The rest of the night, the rest of the planets are largely horrendous. And Clee Anselm is obviously, everyone says it's good. So yeah, exactly, and it's nice beaches and stuff. But I'm not really a beach person. I do like a good city. So Coruscant during the Old Republic, probably. With the proviso that I can go on holiday to other planets every now and then. So, because I'm very much someone who likes living in a city but being near countryside, which obviously there isn't a lot on Coruscant. So, as long as I can, take a hyperjump to someone like Naboo in the meantime, that's good.
What is your favorite snack food?
My favorite snack food is probably dry roasted peanuts.
There you go. And what is your favorite word?
My favorite word?
Yep.
What is my favorite word? I don't know. I've never really thought about it.
We ask the important questions here.
I know. This is what people have been waiting to hear about. Forget the elections that are going around in the world. Forget things like Brexit. What is Cavan Scott's favourite word? I like the word tabard for no good reason. Tabard. It's got a nice feel to it. But that's a really odd choice. That's a bizarre thing. I had someone who I know hated the word moist that I used to work with. So I used to try and put that into every other sentence. Because that was also a form of workplace bullying. So this is.
Django here likes to regularly harass me by bringing up Callista Ming from Legends canon, as I fully believe in Luke and Mara forever. So I can understand that one.
Okay.
But thank you for indulging us with those questions, and thank you for coming on our stream today.
Yeah,
it's been great fun actually. It's gone really quickly.
Yes, it really did.
And I stayed awake.
You did. We're very happy.
Who was it? Foxy someone or other? I
Foxy
stayed awake.
Tom.
Yeah.
Foxy Tom. I've stayed awake, so hopefully I've now got a pass on that.
Yeah.
And is my T-shirt still winning?
I think so.
Yeah. It was the consensus.
We heard it was really. They just think it looks really sharp with your hoodie.
Thank you. Yes, I think I noticed someone said that I'm color coordinated with my chair. So I always do that. I've got a load of chairs, so so if this was a green T-shirt, it'll be a green chair. It's how I roll. Absolutely. If someone's just said that I've said the word moist and they hate it, so sorry about that. Sorry.
You'll have to keep an eye out. You're more than welcome to come back. Next month we're going to do something with the holiday special, and I know that we are both big fans of the holiday special.
Yeah, I see. I've only got one reference in so far.
And Akmina is technically kind of back in canon from FacPov.
Yeah, well, most things now most things from the holiday special in some way or another are now back in canon.
Right.
Yeah, thanks to Chuck Wendig too, bringing Lumpy back and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, that's my daughters are obsessed with Lumpy, and that might have a lot to do with me. And I haven't watched it yet this year because obviously it's not the we don't have Thanksgiving, so for me it is Life Day. But I usually get it in before it was the anniversary, wasn't it, recently?
Yeah,
so,
just this past weekend.
But it will be watched this week in its entirety, very loud. But yeah, so I got the pontoons in on the Falcon when it went into the water, and that's the only thing I've managed so far. There was almost a Life Day reference in one of the Adventures in Wild Space, and it had to come out
Aw.
But there was a reference to the Graff family celebrating Life Day. But one day I'll get that back in. One day.
It's the good fight, really, to try to just recanonize that as much as possible.
Yeah, and also get a 4K release of it. And
Please.
also I want to sit and watch a orchestra play the score.
Yes.
Holiday Special.
The version I watch every year is somebody recorded it off of television, and it has the 1978 commercials in it too, and that just adds so much.
Yeah, and explains a lot probably. Yeah. Something has to with that film. I might go and watch it now, actually.
There you go. Live tweet it for us.
Maybe not. I have to be careful. Someone's saying, Mac Yagui. I've noticed there's people talking. This is it. So they've never seen the holiday special, or they need to. I think. What are you doing watching me? Go watch
the holiday special.
Yeah.
We did a video series last year. I subjected 2 of my friends who, for some reason, still talk to me, and they watched it for the first time, and we recorded them watching it, and we released that. And
I know when I watch the holiday special, I really know, and it's but there is still a lot of love in my heart for it.
The itchy VR scene broke one of them for sure.
I think itchy in general just breaks people.
Yeah.
Something about his bottom lip that's quite disturbing. Yeah. I don't think Itch is canon yet, is he?
No,
not specifically.
There's time, Cavan.
Let me write him a note.
I did see just the other day that Mark Hamill said he'd never watched it all the way through since it aired.
I don't really blame him.
No, I mean, to be honest, I think there's something wrong with me that I've watched it as many times as I have.
I wonder that about myself too.
Yeah.
It's like I'll sit there and be legitimately concerned if like the Star Wars movie I'm about to watch is going to be any good, and then I will gleefully go home and watch the holiday special, and for some reason.
I know. It's the same I say, if you've read the Ewok comic from Discussing, you will know my love for the Ewok films. For sure. And I think a lot of it's due to the fact that I'm probably going to upset someone now, is that I grew up as a Doctor Who fan, and when you're a Doctor Who fan, you like it when it's rubbish as well as when it's good, and there's a real joy some of the worst episodes because you can laugh at them, and and I think that's why I love the holiday special so much, because I love the fact it's absurd. I love the fact it's just bonkers, and who in their right mind would make that, but they did, and so let's celebrate that fact. I'm probably never going to work on Star Wars again now, am I?
I mean, to be fair, I'm not sure how many people from Lucasfilm are yet watching us. One day.
But someone will tell them now. So I'm probably, I might as well just pack my bags. I might be in celebration. You don't know. If I'm not, you now know why.
You can blame us specifically.
Yes, I will be. Definitely.
All right, but we've kept you guys for an hour. So please, link below, like I said, is some reviews of Cavan's different stuff if you want to check that out. You can see up on the screen Cavan's Twitter and his website if you want to go and give those a follow. Cavan does a blog, which you published today even, I think.
Yes, I do it whenever. Yeah, it's not that regular, but I do. So.
All is worth checking out. But we'd like to thank you very much for joining us. It was very exciting.
No,
and
thanks for having me.
Thank you for everyone in chat for hanging out with us.
Thanks to Foxy Tom.
Hashtag Foxy Tom in chat, guys.
This is the beginning of a beautiful, beautiful friendship. if I can stay awake, that is.
Oh man. Well, again, thank you, and thank you everyone, and thanks Yagi for the hashtag, and we will catch you all next week. I don't think we know what we're doing yet, but we will catch you all next week.
We'll still be talking about the holiday special.
We will.
This conversation is never going to end.
Never.
As it should not.
It should never end.